Here we go. Okay, we are, right here at it. Last week, after our introduction, we then introduced this quote from the Talmud. Now, this is a very common process as to how we do our analysis. We offer a quote, so we have a basis to get started. We have an entryway, and then it seems pretty harmless on the surface, but then we go, hold on. This is a lot more complicated because we seem to have contradictory points being made from other source material. And that leads us to an opening, like running your finger across the scotch tape until you find that little edge. And that becomes your entryway, in that there's something greater going on here than we would have otherwise noticed from the simple reading of the basic quote. So we began with a quote from the Talmud that before a neshama is dispatched into this physical world, angels administer to it an oath. And the oath is, be a tzaddik, and we're going to use that word very cautiously, and do not be a Russia. Um, and even if the whole world tells you that you are a tzaddik, be in your eyes like, and that's really the crucial word here, is the word like a Russia. Now, here we have a whole bunch of things that sort of immediately jump off the page, which we're not even going to address directly until much later on. We'll get to some other questions as well, but there's some sort of subtler questions lurking beneath the surface. The first question we ask, of course, is why are you compelling the godly soul, the neshama, to swear to be righteous? I'm all in. The challenge is not the godly soul. The godly soul is your ally. The one you should seemingly be requiring to make this oath is the human side, is the body, the guf, the nefesh habahamis, the Yetzer Hara. All of those, they're in cahoots to be oppositional to this mission. Second of all, why are you making him swear? Why don't you just tell him what to do? And then there is this other aspect that's lingering here as well. What is this second half where even if the whole world tells you you are a tzaddik, so A, why is the world telling you that? You should be in your eyes like a Russia. Is that part of the oath? Is that just a good idea? Is that just a little tidbit for yourself? Or is that absolutely necessary within the oath? And then there is a broader general question, which is why is it valuable for me to consider myself tzaddik, Russia, Beinoni, which of course is going to become our theme? Why is that even relevant? What does the tzaddik have to do? Get up in the morning, do mitzvahs all day. What does the Russia have to do? Get up in the morning, do mitzvahs all day. What does the Beinoni have to do? Get up in the morning, do mitzvahs all day. So why is it even important at any level for me to be thinking about whether or not I am a tzaddik or a Russia or a Beinoni? Is this just for some sort of kind of feel good? So I should be a little bit more comfortable that I'm doing the right thing, or at least I want to know that when the time comes, I'm going to go in the up elevator, not the down elevator. Why is it significant for there to be all of these categorizations and for me to be cognizant of any of these categorizations? Regardless of what I'm categorized as, I have the same obligation: do mitzvahs and don't do averas. So all of this is sort of lurking in the background. But at this point, we're going to take it apart step by step. And again, this is a very common and it would be very familiar to the original audience of Tanya to to recognize this idea, or this pattern where you bring a statement, then you bring what appears to be somewhat contradictory to the statement, and you get thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So it's a tried and true process, and that's why the Alter Rebbe would employ it. It would be very familiar to the original audience and subsequent audiences because it's a very common mechanism of how we study Torah in general, Talmud and codes and so forth. And it leads us in by disrupting our sort of basic narrative that there's something going on here that we would have otherwise missed. Because again, we go through it, we say, yeah, that makes sense, and then we raise a bunch of questions. Oh, wait, that makes no sense, and how are we supposed to deal with all of this contradiction? So here we go. Um, let's just get started just for a running start from the first line. Perak Aleph Tanya B'Seif Perak Gimel Denida. It is taught in the end of the third chapter of the last volume of the Talmud, which is called the Masechta of Nida. Mazbiya Moisai, they compel him to swear, Tehei tzaddik v'al tehei rasha. Be a tzaddik and do not be a rasha. Again, as we mentioned, one seems to negate the other. If I tell you to make a right turn, I don't say, oh, and don't make a left turn. Well, clearly, if I'm making a right turn, I'm not making a left turn. If I'm a tzaddik, I'm not a rasha. And again, another lurking question is, well, isn't this what we all swore at Sinai? Why is it necessary to swear to do it again? We already swore at Sinai to comply with mitzvahs. Even if the whole world is telling you are a tzaddik. Now, why are they telling you this? Is this because they're naive? They don't know what a tzaddik is, or they don't know who you are? We'll see. Heyeh beinecha kirasha. You should be in your eyes like a rasha. Like a rasha. So we say, v'tzarech lahavin. So now, again, this would be the familiar Talmudic style where we start to ask a question against or that challenges what otherwise appears to be a perfectly harmless sort of message. Datnan of Perik Beis, because we have also learned in a Mishnah, which is in Pirkei Avos chapter 2, V'al tehei rasha b'fnei atzmacha. So the Mishnah says, do not be a rasha before yourself. So this statement that we started with says that you should be in your eyes like a rasha. We have this other statement that says, do not be like a rasha in your eyes. So as they say, well, which one is it? Make up your mind. Are we supposed to be a rasha in our eyes, or we're not supposed to be a rasha in our eyes? So here the Alter Rebbe has begun, and we'll see this pattern repeated much later when the Alter Rebbe does analysis of other verses, which again, it's crucial, absolutely crucial to remember that the innovative message of Tanya is not another analysis of psukim or of concepts in Torah. Again, we're not against that. We have libraries and libraries of analysis and questions with an answer and so on. Here, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya is out to draw up for us strategies and tactics for having a meaningful, enthusiastic, and ever increasingly closer relationship with Hashem. So yes, we have many wonderful svarim, and certainly, this is the bulk of our Torah study, is analysis of every word and letter, and some particular life lesson. Oh, that's what we call a vart, and I don't mean that in a disparaging form. It's an idea, it's a thought, it's a takeaway, it's something that we see, or sometimes it's a little bit backwards. We have an idea, and then we squeeze it into something from the parsha or from the holiday or from the current week. I'm not against it. I'm not disparaging it. That is not the message here. The Alter Rebbe is not writing Tanya or even this chapter of Tanya simply to explain this particular nuance of how we perceive ourselves. This, though, is the entryway into this whole broad perspective on how we are to understand our relationship with Hashem. So in that sense, we would not describe this as, I'll use the term, an academic text. Of course, it engages and it utilizes the resources of Torah. In a sense, and again, this is an over-exaggeration, in a sense, the Alter Rebbe could write Tanya without quoting psukim or quotes from the Talmud or the Mishnah and so on. That would not be familiar to us, and we really want things to be rooted, of course, in Torah. The concepts are true and they're derived from Torah, and whether the Alter Rebbe gives you the source material or the chapter and verse does not really change the whole concept that the Alter Rebbe is trying to communicate to us. And that becomes evident in the next line. So far, we've raised an idea, and now we've got a perpendicular quote. So we've got a battle of quotes, two different Talmudic quotes. One, be in your eyes like a wicked person. Another Talmudic quote, do not consider yourself wicked. Do not be wicked in your own eyes. So we've got an academic question. But now the Alter Rebbe takes it to a whole nother level. And here, really, again, at the risk of over exaggeration, we capture what the Alter Rebbe is telling us in the message of Tanya. If a person will be in their eyes like a wicked person, so they'll give up. Their heart will become sour, and they'll be despondent. Now, I know that word Eitzev is commonly translated in most English translations as depressed. I just particularly want to avoid that word because I think in our society, our modern society, we have a different understanding of the word depressed. There's a biochemical character to it. It's got a whole different meaning. The Alter Rebbe is not here for mental health in that sense. And again, as the Alter Rebbe will address this much later, that if a person, has a headache, I can tell them to lie down and take 2 aspirin. If they need a root canal, they got to go to a dentist. Torah is not designed here to cure their mental health. So the word Eitzev, even though in modern Hebrew we might translate that as depressed, it's not talking about chemical depression and the way we understand that. It's talking here more about an attitude, and that's why the word that I would suggest for it is despondent, give upness. I give up. What's the difference? Look, no matter what I do, I'm going to fail, and therefore, what's the point? And then what will be the problem? And then I won't be able to serve Hashem with joy or with enthusiasm. So that's a bad thing. Or if I not, so then I could have this sort of carefree attitude, like, all right, so I'm a wicked person. So what? Who's good? There's nobody good in the world anyway. And again, you may recognize this in our modern secular society, where we have a world filled with people saying, so everybody's bad. Who's a good person anyway? Nobody's a good person. Everybody's got their problems. King David did this bad thing. This one did this bad thing. So I'm like everyone else. So the person, if they do that, God forbid, they wind up in a way of kalos. Kalos means they take things too lightly. That is, they're dismissive. They take it lightly. It's not important. It's not weighty. It's not substantive. And therefore they dismiss it. Now, herein, again, encapsulates really the gift that Tanya brings to us. As we noted, the Alter Rebbe begins with a quote from the Talmud. So that's unassailable. It says it in the Talmud. That's what it says. Then we give you another quote. But at that point, we, the sort of readers, are kind of out of the discussion, meaning it would be lahavdil, but imagine you're listening to a debate between two geologists about the dangers and benefits of offshore drilling. So I don't have anything to say about offshore drilling. I don't know. So this guy quotes his source. He says, I have a study. This guy says, no, I have a study. I have a recent scientific finding. I have a recent scientific finding. And me, in the audience, I'm just going to have to pick a lane. Which guy sounds more convincing that his study is right and that guy's study is wrong? In other words, I have nothing to say. I have nothing to contribute to the conversation of academics quoting source material back and forth. I'm there to listen. And how do I know what's right or what's wrong? I have no way of knowing. When the Alter Rebbe adds these two very human responses to this instruction, A, that the message that I should be like a wicked person, even though the whole world is telling me I'm righteous, I should consider myself wicked. And the Alter Rebbe gives us a human response to that. Well, that's going to result in despondence, or it's going to result in disregard, like, hey, who cares? And nobody's perfect, and therefore whatever I do is not so bad because, you win some, you lose some kind of mentality. Well, that I can have a participation in. That resonates with me. Now you're not discussing something that's at some arm's length distance, way off there in the side. And again, you may recognize this in the process of education. When a child is little, we're so focused on the skills. They have to learn how to read. And then we want them to retain what they've read. But when do they ever get to have any analysis? Now, it's a very delicate balance. On the one hand, we don't really want fourth graders debating the great concepts of life. And we simply have to give them data that they are expected to master and respond to. And we're not really asking them whether they have an opinion about this data. We're just simply laying it out for them. And again, in expectation that they will master it and then be able to present it back when called upon. And then at a certain point, you get to where, well, what do you think about this? And that's rather shocking. And it's a real disruptor. And the Alter Rebbe here it lays it out right in the very beginning that, yes, we have absolute academic basis for what we're saying. Because again, anyone can get up there and start pontificating about philosophies of life. And then we say, okay, that's nice, but what does that have to do with Torah? Is that a Torah? That's your idea. In fact, just to use an illustration of that, perhaps the first book that speaks to sort of character in contrast to the many, many books that we have that speak about process, what's acceptable behavior, what's unacceptable, and what's expected of us and what's not expected of, or what's expected for us not to do, the rules, the do's, the don'ts, and so on, is the book of Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos, which is commonly translated as the ethics of our fathers, even though the word Pirkei means the chapters of our fathers, is distinctive in the books of Talmud that there's no right, wrong. It's about character. Now, the first Mishnah, as you may recall, of the Pirkei Avos is a list of the sort of chain of command or the chain of evidence from Sinai all the way down to the authors of Pirkei Avos. And we, the readers, raise the question, why is this dropped in here in the book of Pirkei Avos? If there is any question as to the chain of evidence from Sinai till the Talmud, you would think that should be in the first book of the Talmud, so that the reader of Talmud says, hey, how do we know? Well, this is the chain of command. Why is it specifically in Pirkei Avos, which is in the middle of the discussions of the volumes of Talmud? And amongst the many answers are that when it comes to Pirkei Avos, one might have made the mistake of thinking that this, that is character and like we call it ethics, this is not Torah. This is the wisdom of some very smart and righteous people. And the Torah is how to build the Beis HaMikdash, how to operate the laws of Shabbos, how to fulfill the commandments, the rules, the contracts, and so on. But when it comes to the basic ethics, that we glean from some intuitive sense of it. And therefore, when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote down the Mishnah, he wanted to make it absolutely emphatically clear that the rules and the laws and the ethics and the materials of Pirkei Avos are absolutely Torah, just like the laws of Kashrus and Shabbos and Pesach and temple service, etc., etc. Because it's easy to dismiss it that this isn't really Torah. This is just the very good ideas that come from very smart people. Now, a classic point that Hasidus really emphasizes is the inseparability between Torah scholarship and personal virtue and piety. Now, that may seem incredibly obvious. However, I can tell you that in some circles, the two are not seen as absolutely in concert. Or they may be that the guy happens to be a scholar and he happens to be a very pious person. But that's not necessarily the case, that there can be some separation between scholarship and righteousness. And a key point that Hasidus emphasizes is you can never separate the two. And as a consequence of that, a key point of Hasidus is that Torah has to always be an instruction, the uvechein. What is the therefore that we're going to take from this? So on the one hand, what do you mean they're there? Now I know how to execute the mitzvahs. I need to know how to execute the mitzvahs. Therefore, I have to have a critical mass of data. That is true. What then is the personal lesson? As many are familiar, the Baal Shem Tov's message that everything a Jew sees and hears, and as the Rebbe underscores, and certainly if it comes from Torah, must be a directive in the service of Hashem. Now, that can be rather difficult to understand. How is it that mastering the laws of which items become tameh and commute, tumah, and so on, what does that have to do with my own personal life? And that's what we have to dig and find. So here with the Alter Rebbe, not just raising an academic question, doing that as well, and then raising a very human question, that this is our human experience, in contrast, or in addition, contrast is the wrong word, in addition to the academic question, sets the tone that Tanya is about a very personal experience in our service of Hashem. And again, that's addressing the students of Tanya who are saying, hey, just if we say, well, I don't feel passion and enthusiasm in the service of Hashem, here's a book, a 500-page Hebrew book about why you have to. You have to. What do you mean? It says right here, it's a pasuk. You have to serve Hashem with joy. What do you mean you don't feel joy? What do you mean? I mean, we don't give you an opinion about whether or not you think meat and milk is kosher or not. That's what it says. So it says, serve Hashem with joy. Here's the book that says, serve Hashem with joy. What do you mean you don't want to? Or you don't like it? Who cares? What do you mean? You're wrong. Just like kosher means you have to separate meat and milk, service means you have to serve Hashem with joy. And the integration of this into the same stature as the laws of the Shabbos is one of the gifts and challenges, and one of the things that, look, some people were not so down with this in the study of Hasidus. They were like, no, this is a bunch of, feel-good stuff. Torah is about the rules, the laws, commerce, all the laws of Shabbos, et cetera, et cetera. That is a certain argument that is made. Okay, so we got a challenge now. Now we've opened ourselves up to a challenge. We got one statement that says that you should consider yourself, and the key to the answer is like a Russia. And we got other reasons to say you shouldn't. So what am I supposed to do? So you note there's a period here, and we're going to see this multiple times, so it's a good time to point it out. And it says ach. Now the word ach really suggests like a divider. It is often suggested that we not use the word but, because it's kind of undoes the statement. I really like this, but it could have been this. So the word ach is a real hard break. And the period with the ach really, Alter Rebbe is underscoring. Ha'inyan, the point is, we find in the Gemara 5 divisions, 5 character traits. Now, they are tzaddik v'toivloi, tzaddik v'ra'loi, rasha v'toivloi, rasha v'ra'loi, v'beinani. Now, these are terms that you're already familiar with, so I'm going to ask you to try to empty out your presumption of what these words mean and really try to see how the Alter Rebbe walks us through it. They are the tzaddik and good is to him. The tzaddik and bad is to him. The rasha and good is to him. The rasha and bad is to him. Now I want you to look very closely at the last word here. The beinani and beinani. Now, if you look in the original quote in the Talmud, you will not find these 5 all listed out this way. There are only 4 listed out. The word beinani is not listed in the same page of Talmud that these other 4 levels, the tzaddik and good to him, the tzaddik and bad to him, the wicked and bad, good to him, the wicked and bad to him. And this is indicated by the Alter Rebbe adding the connector v'beinani and beinani. Now, again, as the name of the book, the Sefer Shal Beinanim, has already suggested, that's really what we're going to highlight. We're really here to talk about the beinani. Curiously, in the Talmud, the term beinani is not given almost any note. Because we've learned this before and you may be familiar, the term beinani, as we'll see, was a temporary way station where you happen to hit 50 mitzvahs and 50 averas. But of course, the next thing you did is going to tip the scales, as we'll see. So let's continue here a little bit more. Upirsha b'Gemara, the Gemara explains, what is the tzaddik v'toivloi? Again, the tzaddik and good is to him. That's a tzaddik gomer. He's a complete tzaddik. Now, the Alter Rebbe later is going to explain, what is he completed? What does that mean? He's the complete tzaddik. What is it that he has completed? We'll get there. Tzaddik v'raloi, what is the tzaddik and bad is to him? That's a tzaddik she'ena gomer. That's the tzaddik who has not completed. It's not complete. Whatever it is that the tzaddik v'toivloi has completed, the tzaddik v'raloi has not yet completed. So what the completion is, we haven't described. We're just giving you some data. Ubaraya Mehemna. So in the Raya Mehemna, which is a book of the Kabbalah, Parshas Mishpatim Peresh. So again, the Alter Rebbe gives you the footnotes, the bibliography, because students of that time are going to be insisted on this. And it's crucial, again, to establish that this isn't just, my idea, and I'm borrowing these phrases from the Talmud. So what does it say in the Raya Mehemna? It says, Tzaddik v'raloi, the tzaddik, that ra is to him, means shara shaboy kafuf l'toiv, that the ra is bent. The word kaf means like a spoon or the palm, and the idea is like a scoop. So it's a spoon or the palm. It's bent. What is bent? Again, we're going to see. The ra is bent to him. Uv Gemara Seif Perek Tes de Brachas, in the Gemara in the end of the 9th chapter of Brachas, which is the first volume of the Talmud, Tzadikim Yetzer Tov Shoifta. The Tzadikim, their Yetzer Tov, and we're going to be real cautious with how we translate this word, because that's what we're going to highlight a little bit later on. It translates as judge, although if you look in your English translations, it may say something more like rule. And that's going to become a real point of contention that the Alter Rebbe is going to make. Rishoyim Yetzirah Shofta, and the Rasha is judged or ruled by his Yetzirah. And Beinanim Zeh v'Zeh Shofta, and the Beinanim, this one and that one, judge them. Amar Rabbah, so Rabbah said, Kagoyna na Beinani. For example, I am a Beinani. Now, here's a little dirty secret. Rabbah never said that. He didn't say, I am like a Beinani. He said, we are like Beinanim. So how do you know he meant himself? Maybe he's saying, we are the Sunday morning class. It doesn't mean that's my personal identity. It's an aspect of my existence. It's something about me. It doesn't mean, how do we know that it means, it's exactly literally myself? And the answer to that is indicated in the next quote. Amarle Abaye. So Abaye said to him, L'shavik marchai l'chol beria. You do not leave life to anybody. Meaning, if you are only a Beinani and you are the leader, so we are all certainly less than you, Rasha. And a Rasha is considered like someone who was dead. As you recall, excuse me, Rashi says in the last Rashi in Parshas Bereshis, Rashi says that the dead, even the wicked, even when they are alive, they are dead. So Abaye's reaction to Rabbah's statement is the indicator that Rabbah did in fact mean to include himself. Meaning, sometimes, and we've all had this experience, and we even do it sometimes in Torah, we sort of take a half statement and we use it as a model for something. But when you read the whole statement, you see it means something completely different. And it's not evil necessarily. It's a form, it's a saying. So maybe Rabbah was being humble. Maybe he was being general, we in the broader sense, because again, the precise quote is not how the Alter Rebbe has it here. He didn't say, Kagoin ana, for example, I am a Beinani. He said instead, Kagoin anu Beinanim. We are Beinanim. And we're like, well, what does that mean? Why is the Alter Rebbe changing it? And the explanation is because we're not here for an academic analysis. We're here to illustrate this point. You'll argue that Rabbah didn't mean that he was a Beinani. You're being overly literal. He meant it in the general sense of it. And the Alter Rebbe therefore quotes Abaye's response. Abaye was Rabba's colleague, and his response, which again, he's not just being melodramatic, his response of saying, well, based on that, we who are all lesser than you are certainly Russia, and a Russia is considered like someone who's not alive. So Abaye's reaction affirms that Rabbah meant to include himself literally in the category of Beinoni. Now, let's just finish, and we'll come back for a moment. Ulahavin calls that. So now our mission is, and we'll see this term again in Tanya later, to understand this Be'er Hativ. Now, what is Be'er Hativ? So we translate to understand it very well. Now, again, that seems a little redundant. Of course, we want to understand it very well. What's the difference between understanding it not so well? Why would we make it an objective to just kind of understand it? So we explain that when it says Be'er Hativ, to understand it very well, it means not just to have the academic data line up. It means that it becomes personalized and transformed within our existence. It's not just about being able to recite the academic truisms. It's about internalizing the message so it reaches into our very identity. That's the message of Tanya. Again, we're not here, not that we're against it. I don't mean to belittle it, but we're not here for academic exercise and for simply putting all the different slots into the proper space so that we can cope with, or we can organize the academic ideas. It's about having a true and personal understanding. And here the Alter Rebbe starts to throw in some more ideas. But before we get there, because we're going to have some more questions before we even start getting towards the answers. And remember the theme, as we discussed last week, what is the purpose of Tanya? To tell us what is different about the Jewish people, that we have a godly soul. If I have a godly soul, how come I still have temptation for laziness and indulgence and quick-temperedness and my other flaws? Because I also have an animal soul. What am I supposed to do about it? Okay, that's 53 chapters of Tanya. That's what we're supposed to do about it. So again, in the world of pure academics, you come in the morning, you get a question, you work on it throughout the afternoon, and at night you have the answer. And that will work in the page of the Talmud. But in a lifelong struggle to have a meaningful and vibrant relationship with Hashem, we should not expect to have a question, an answer, and a resolution page by page. So it's a hard thing especially for our very impatient generation. And that's why the Alter Rebbe informs you that this is a long, short way. It's not just boom that you get the answer. Long, short way means you got to really be in it for the long haul to start getting to the answer. Now, what we have certainly concluded is that a Beinoni is not just a guy who's kind of pretty good, right? Because as the Alter Rebbe will say, how could Rabbah describe himself as a guy who spends half his time doing things he shouldn't be doing? Now, again, there is a difference between being humble and lying, and they're not the same. And particularly if you're trying to teach a lesson. So if you're trying to teach your students what a Beinoni is, to say that a Beinoni is somebody who spends half his time or half his activities in ungodly things, for Rabbah to say that is ridiculous. So again, it's not, well, he's very humble. He's so humble. There's a difference between humble and lying. And the two should not be conflated. That would be a major mistake to conflate the two. So this term Beinoni, which does not get a lot of play in the Talmud, it's much more about tzaddik in Russia. Now, herein lies one of the big challenges. There is an explanation that why did God give us the Torah in the wilderness? Why didn't he give it to us in Yerushalayim? Or give it to us in Egypt? Give it to us in the holiest of places, or give it to us in the lowliest of places. Why does Hashem give us the Torah in the wilderness? Well, one explanation is because in order to accept Torah, you have to completely empty yourself of any preconceived notions. The analogy that I like is it's like learning a language. We we see a child, they grow up in a home, they speak English and Hebrew and Yiddish and Spanish, and he picks up all the languages, no problem. And he switches from language to language, and somehow he intuitively knows when he should be speaking English and when he should be speaking Spanish and when he should be speaking French and Hebrew and Yiddish. And the accents change and so on. Now, you take an adult who's got a more developed intellect, who may have a stronger IQ, who's got more life experience, and you start teaching them how to speak a foreign language. And it's very, very difficult. Why is it so difficult? This little kid speaks 3 languages and the adult doesn't. Well, amongst all kinds of explanations, one very simple one is that the child is total bittel. They're not asking, how do you say table in Spanish? They're simply learning, just like when did I learn that a table is a table? I don't know. I just learned it. You just pick up words. You don't know how and when and why. And somehow they know why when to speak Spanish and when to speak Hebrew and when to speak Yiddish. Well, the same thing. Were Hashem to give us the Torah in Egypt, we would see it with Egyptian eyes. Were Hashem to give us Torah in Yerushalayim, we'd see it with holy eyes. By going out into the wilderness, into the desert, into a place that's unsettled, Hashem is saying, if you want to receive Torah, you have to completely empty yourself. You have to vacate everything in your mind, all of your preconceived notions. Now, that's a very difficult challenge to do. I don't like it sort of emotionally because I don't like feeling stupid. I know what that is. Just tell me what it is in Spanish. It's very frustrating and it's very difficult. So, in learning Tanya, and really in all forms of learning, when we're taking on a whole new subject, we have to have this very odd combination. On the one hand, we have to be totally receptive to a whole new message. On the other hand, we have to be totally forward-thinking and almost aggressive in seeing it and understanding it. The Talmud tells us of a great sage who studied in the Babylonian academy, and then he went to study in the Jerusalem academy. And, may sound bizarre, he fasted in the hopes of forgetting what he learned in the Babylonian Talmud, in the Babylonian school. He said, why would he do that? Because he wanted, again, to be a totally empty, receptive vessel. And it's a hard thing because there's an instinctive thing. Okay, so why you say, I have a question. Excuse me, wait. The Rebbe told Dr. Velvel Green, who was a scientist and became involved with Chabad in the 60s, that when he starts learning, he shouldn't ask any questions for the first period of time. Because right away, I don't understand, excuse me, wait, hold on. You got to be receptive. And it's a hard thing to do. You got to be an empty vessel to receive. Now, the reason why I bring this up is these terms are familiar to us. You know, I made the analogy before about a debate. So if the two people are debating a topic that I've never heard of, I don't raise my hand and start asking questions because I don't even know the lingo that they're speaking. So I'm completely receptive to however they're explaining it because I don't have anything to contribute. But here we see words that we recognize. We see this word tzaddik and this word rasha. Now these are common words that we use in descriptions of people. And we say, oh, that guy's a tzaddik. Now it's not wrong, as we'll see, to say that a really nice guy is a tzaddik. And we say that guy's a rasha means he is the most vicious, evil. You know, Haman is a rasha. And Yosef is a tzaddik. Oh, that guy's a tzaddik, or the sweet guy who always comes early and he brings donuts for everybody. What a tzaddik. And it's not wrong. But again, it's like saying hot. If the oven is at 400 degrees, it's hot. If it's 100 degrees outside, it's a hot day. Well, what is hot? Is hot 100 degrees or is hot 400 degrees? Well, that's a silly thing because Hashem is infinite. And therefore, this idea that things are going to line up in absolute perfect, neat little algorithms is just incorrect. On the other hand, if the world is just total chaos, then what do you want from me? If nothing has any definitive meaning, then there's nothing I can do with it. So the first thing the Alter Rebbe does here is he completely wants to shatter that usage of the term of tzaddik as a really good guy and rasha as a really bad guy. And I should say, another use of those terms, which we really need to shed, is the end of days form of that term. In other words, am I going to heaven or am I going in the down elevator? And the reason for that is because that's not what our focus is. Our focus is not end of days, our focus is day by day. In the moment, what is my relationship like with Hashem? And that's where there can be a value in knowing. We asked earlier, why is it important to know whether I'm a tzaddik or a beni? Every day I got to do the same thing. I got to learn Torah, do mitzvahs every day, regardless of whether I'm a tzaddik or a Rosh or a beni. It doesn't matter. Every day I have to do the same things. What's the difference? Well, by understanding where my character is, that's where I can apply my sense of judgment. What's the difference between the doctor or the plumber who has 30 years of experience and the one who just graduated? Because the one who's got 30 years of experience can just sense when there can be an exception made from protocol. Now, again, in our life experience, everybody is so fearful and we don't have personal relationships with doctors or plumbers, so everybody just wants to follow the book because they're afraid of being sued and so on. But we know this just in our own life. Life is much more art than science. It's much more about a certain judgment. Now, we get cocky. The kid gets his driver's license and he wants to go 100 miles an hour. And yet there are times when that can be valuable and appropriate. So by understanding our status and by understanding that whether or not we can trust our inclinations, and we can say the fact that I feel something might be an indication that it's a valuable thing, or hey, don't get so ahead of yourself and think, well, just because I feel it, therefore I should do it because I'm such a righteous person that if I feel indignation, I should speak out. On the other hand, say, hey, I do have a certain sense of what's going on here. And that is the challenge of life. That's what I'm saying. Life is much more art than it is science. So here we go. The Alter Rebbe has now, hopefully, almost sufficiently confused us. And we're going to come back to each of these questions. We're not just throwing this out there and then we're going to sort of forget about it. This isn't simply designed to be a disruptor of the presumption of the meaning of these words, tzaddik and Rasha and Beinoni. We are going to come back and address each of these. But how? Well, okay, that's what the book of Tanya is. That's the long, short way. So our impatience, like, okay, what's the answer? What's the answer? And if you look at the handout that I emailed to everybody, you'll find a lot of those answers because I summarized it for you. Because, of course, we all want to be able to sleep at night, and we may not be able to wait until we get to the end. So here we go. Ulahavin calls it V'gam Lahavin. Another question. Masha Amri Eov. This that Eov says, and it's quoted in the Gemara in Baba Basra Perek Aleph. Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the world. Barasa tzadikim, barasa rashoyim. Chulu. You created righteous people and you created wicked people. Baha tzadik barash lekamar. We have a rule that a person cannot control most things about their identity. You can't control when you're born. You can't control if your mother smoked cigarettes when she was pregnant with you. You can't control where they sent you to school. You can't control how tall you're going to be. You can't control whether you're going to be of a strong constitution or a weaker constitution. There are very few, almost no things you can control. The one thing that you can control is your virtue. You can control whether or not you will be righteous or you will be wicked. That's the only thing you can control. So as Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, and now Israelites, what is it that Hashem asks of you? ? Only that you may fear him. That's the only thing Hashem can ask of you. He can't ask you to be taller. He can't ask you to run faster. He can only ask you for your ethical virtue. That's the only character trait you can control. You can't control, again, any other thing about yourself. And yet, Eov is making the statement that Hashem, you created people righteous, tzaddik, or wicked. So what up with that? So now we have ventured off, meaning again, we have this as in a process in Talmud. We raise a question, and then another question. Why do we need so many questions? What is this adding to the pantheon of questions that we haven't already raised? I mean, we already raised, sort of disrupted the conventional wisdom that tzaddik, it means a really good guy, and Russia means the most horrible guy. Here, this is a whole other nuance. Can I truly control what it is that I'm going to be? So remember, the angels administer the oath, be righteous and don't be wicked. Is it really within my capacity? Can I really be righteous? Now, we know that everybody is born with their own package of troubles and temptations and so on. And there is a certain sense of, I'm just an angry person. I'm just a lazy person. I'm just an indulgent person. I'm just a gluttonous person. That's just, how can you tell me not to do it? And yet we're told that we are given that capacity to control ourselves. Why does God impose upon us temptations for things that we are not to do? I don't know. I don't have the answer. That is the question. Pirkei Avos tells us we cannot understand the serenity of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous. So here we are back to this idea. These terms, tzaddik in Russia, which really are in the extremes that we're not going to be speaking so much about because our focus is Beinoni, but in order to understand Beinoni, we're going to have to understand them. Just to give you a heads up, we're not going to really get to addressing the Beinoni until chapter 12. In 10, we'll talk about the tzaddik. In 11, we'll talk about the Russia. In 12, we'll talk about the Beinoni. Or maybe I have it backwards. It's Russia, tzaddik, whatever. But 12 is the Beinoni. So again, we have an impatience, or at least I do. Okay, what's the answer? So if you have that impatience, you can certainly check the chart that I sent you where I kind of summarized the idea. All right. So here we go. Also, we want to understand, and this is really where our focus is. Now, the Alter Rebbe did write a book of tzaddikim, but it was destroyed in a fire, which the Alter Rebbe took to mean that the world is not really ready for this. So whatever we write about tzaddikim is not really what the tzaddik is. It's what the Beinoni the aspiring Beinoni can appreciate about a tzaddik. So it's a level that really we cannot get our arms around. Again, lahavdil, to use an analogy, I mean, I don't play music, but if a person plays the piano, tell them to understand what the greatest piano player, Beethoven, is. To understand, I mean, you cannot get yourself to that level. Even if you practice, hours and hours a day, there is a certain giftedness. And by that, I mean, it's a gift given from Hashem that they have to develop for sure. Again, it's not to disparage the accomplishment, but it's not something that, quote, the average person can just work really hard and reach. You can be anything you want to be is not really true. I don't even know what I want to be, but this, just work hard enough and you can have it is not really true. It's not really true. So what, in fact, is this Beinoni thing? So the common, again, conventional wisdom that we have to disrupt is the Beinoni is 50-50, is in between. It's certainly not somebody who has half his life doing virtuous things and half his life doing unvirtuous or sinful things. That's not. Now, you may note here that the Alter Rebbe uses this phrase, ha Beinoni. It's the fifth word after the period. Ha Beinoni. Now, this is a nuance. It's extraordinarily significant. The conventional wisdom was that a Beinoni was, like I called it before, a way station, and in between. Look at that. It's like you're checking out the grocery. You go, look at that. I have exactly $9. Of course, the next thing you scan, now it's $10.42. So it's a momentary thing. Look at that. I got 50 mitzvahs, 50 averas. The Alter Rebbe here puts the definitive hey, and you'll see this in chapter 12, the Beinoni. And one of the distinctive messages of the Alter Rebbe of Tanya is that Beinoni is not just an in-between moment. Beinoni is a status. And you think, well, why is it a status? At every moment, either I'm connecting with Hashem or I'm disconnecting from Hashem. Even if I argue, well, I wasn't doing anything, well, that's a disconnect because I had the opportunity to connect and I didn't. So at every moment, I'm either being tzaddik or Russia. So where is there ever a chance to be Beinoni? Every moment, I'm either connected or I'm disconnected. So when is there a chance to be Beinoni? Yes. I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
I do.
I can't find Habenani. I must
Okay.
not be on the exact line. Could you just help me 1 second?
Okay. Well, again, I don't
Oh,
know
it
which of the
is. It
prints.
is. I see the fifth now. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Ha
Thank
beta.
you.
So that's crucial, even though, again, it's a subtle point because it's the Alter Rebbe's message that he's headed towards is that Beinoni is a status. It's an aspirational status. Now, much later on in chapter 19, the Alter Rebbe gives it away almost like he slips and he says, Halavai Beinoni. We wish you could be a Beinoni. It's not even really, that's not even really an expectation. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's an aspiration. But this is part of the Chiddush that you don't find. As I mentioned earlier, when the Alter Rebbe says we find in the Gemara 5 categories, the only ones that you find together are the 2 levels of tzaddik and 2 levels of rasha, and then Beinoni is mentioned somewhere else. And then we find this quote from Rabbah about Beinoni. So one of the innovative points of Tanya is that the Alter Rebbe has utilized the term Beinoni for its own status, not again like a happenstance, almost like a coincidence. What do you know? I got 50 and 50. Now we know that it's not that because if it was, how could we possibly imagine that Rabbah was a Beinoni? Because is somebody going to really suggest that Rabbah, and again, there's a difference between being humble and lying, that Rabbah really considered that half his life was filled with non Torah, with sins? Come on, that's so ridiculous. That to be again not humble but meaningless. And here the Alter Rebbe doubles down. Lo pasik pumi migirsa. He never interrupted his mouth from learning. Now, again, even if he never interrupted his mouth from learning, which is a distinctive quality that was special about Rabbah, that even the angel of death couldn't dominate him. Okay, so let's say he didn't, like every other author of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Are we really going to suggest that half his life was spent in sinful behavior? I mean, why does the Alter Rebbe need to double down on this? And part of the explanation is, well, you might argue that every moment that I'm not learning Torah, I am in a sense disconnecting from Hashem because I'm wasting that opportunity to study Torah. So the Alter Rebbe is saying, no, even that he didn't have because every moment he was studying Torah. There wasn't even this sort of in between silence where he wasn't being aligned with the study of Torah. So again, even if you wanted to argue that when we mean sins, we don't mean eating pork. We mean even not studying Torah, which, as we'll see later on, there are statements in the Talmud that consider that to be, quote, sinful, because he's not utilizing that moment to connect with Hashem. It's like your best friend walks into the room and you're there and they ignore you. He said, well, I didn't say anything rude. Yeah, but you ignored me. So if he's busy, of course, you understand. Okay, the guy's busy doing something. If he's quote got nothing to do and he doesn't align with me, you might say, well, that's a form of disconnect. He's separated between me and him. There's a pull apart there. And if so, not studying Torah is a disconnect from the infinity of Hashem. So you might argue, well, he didn't study Torah at every moment, and therefore, if you count it up every second, but therefore the Alter Rebbe addresses that concern and says, Rabbah specifically was known as never ceasing to speak words of Torah. So much so that, again, this isn't just an exaggerated term, that even the angel of death couldn't touch him. So again, if Rabbah was a Beinoni or was a model of a Beinoni, even if he wasn't in fact a Beinoni, if he was the model of a Beinoni, how could we say that a Beinoni spends half his time doing sins? It's just completely blown that out of the water. So again, the term Beinoni is not given a lot of discussion in the Talmud. The Alter Rebbe is kind of borrowing this phrase, Beinoni, and he's utilizing it as its own category, which he's going to develop, as Tanya goes on. So again, the instantaneous, okay, so what's the answer? But here the Alter Rebbe now comes to the more direct question. Void additionally, every moment is either a mitzvah or an avera. The person is doing an avera, even if that avera is a passive avera by wasting time or sitting off and staring off into the sun meaninglessly. So at that moment, he's disconnected from Hashem. It's like being on the cell phone. You get cut off, you cut off. That's it. You're not sort of half yes, no. It's either you're connected or you're disconnected. So if he's disconnected, that's called Russia. Then he does tshuva. You call back. Now you're tzaddik. So when is there ever a chance to be a Beinoni? So if we're looking at it only at the cumulative, the sort of end of days, the scorekeeper, right? So then you get 50 mitzvahs, 50 averas, and now you're a Beinoni. But if we're looking at a moment to moment, when am I a Beinoni? At every moment, I'm either connected with Hashem or I'm disconnected from Hashem. Mikri Russia. And even if I violate a quote, light concept from the Rabbanan, that is, it's not even a first degree avera, but at that moment I am called, again, the word called, I'm acting in that way. His character is Nikra, but here it's Mikre. It's describing the behavior. At that moment, the behavior is disconnect behavior. Disconnect behavior is Russia. Well, this is very uncomfortable. The word Russia means a wicked person. That's what the word Russia means. Beinoni, an in-between person. Russia, wicked, Beinoni, in between. So the Russia, at that moment, he is disconnected. And when he's doing a mitzvah, he's connected. So which point is it? And this is very uncomfortable. I don't like to think of myself as a Russia. I don't like to think of that guy who's a great guy, that he's ever a Russia. Well, nobody's perfect. Well, what does that mean? Right. In the moment. And again, it's like being on the cell phone. If I get cut off, I'm cut off. If I connected, I'm connected. There's what's the in between? Either I'm connected or I'm disconnected. Even somebody who could stop someone else from sinning, and he doesn't, he is Nikra Russia. He is called a Russia. Now, we'll get into this in some greater detail a little bit later, but just for the moment, to help us understand, we're talking about a scenario where I can stop the other person from doing it. That's the given. And I don't stop him. Why don't I stop him? Because at some level, I don't think it's so bad, even though I don't do it. Meaning, God forbid you saw a child about to put his hand on the stove, you would stop him. Why? Who are you to say? Maybe he wants to. Because you have no tolerance for that idea. There's no way that that's like an acceptable thing to do. So why is it that if I see somebody doing a different avera and I have the ability to stop it? Now I know I couldn't stop him, he wouldn't listen to me. Why don't I jump in and say, hey, stop that? Because at some level, I don't think it's so bad. So that means it lives within me. So before we use the word, if you look in the Hebrew, and we said if someone violates a, quote, light sin, he's Mikre Russia. He is described as a Russia. And here we're saying that if I don't stop someone else from sinning, Nikra Russia. It's two forms of the same root word. One is the description of the action, because the guy is violating the sin, even if it's a, quote, light sin. The other is Nikra Russia, Nun Kuf Resh Aleph, again, the only difference in the Hebrew, where the person doesn't stop someone else from sinning, and that is a description of his character. Again, why am I not stopping? When I can. That's the scenario. So we can't say, well, he wouldn't listen anyway. No, we're giving you the given is that he is going to listen to you. Why don't I stop him? Because a little bit, it doesn't bother me that much. Because there's a little bit of it that in my life, within me, doesn't hurt me. The kid putting his hand on the stove, I have no tolerance for. This other person, fill in the blank, Avera, I have some tolerance for. I don't do it, but it doesn't shock me and repulse me and frighten me like the child about to put their hand on the stove. Okay, we'll stop here.